As I have long said, our government believes that military deployments abroad should be subject to parliamentary approval. That's why last year we put the extension of our military commitment to Afghanistan to a parliamentary vote. A majority of MPs in the House of Commons agreed to extend the mission through February 2009. That mandate ends roughly 16 months from now, and as we move forward toward a decision on Canada's role beyond February 2009, our government wants a full, open and informed debate about our options. Given what's at stake, both for our troops and for the Afghan people, we also want the debate to be as nonpartisan as possible. To that end, today I am pleased to announce the formation of an independent panel of eminent Canadians who will consider our options and provide expert, nonpartisan advice that will help parliamentarians make our decision. The panel will be chaired by the Honourable John Manley, Canada's former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs. His panel will consist of Derek Burney, former Canadian Ambassador to the United States, former Canadian Consul General in New York City, Pamela Wallin, the distinguished Montreal business executive as well as former Clerk of the Privy Council, Paul Tellier, and the Honourable Jake Epp, former Federal Cabinet Minister and current Chair of Health Partners International, a non-profit organization that is providing medical aid in Afghanistan. I want to thank all of these people for agreeing to take on this important task. Collectively, they represent a wealth of experience in foreign affairs, and each one of them has demonstrated their commitment to Canada through years of public service. I've asked the panel to examine four main options for the future of the Afghanistan mission, although they may consider other options. Option one is to continue training the Afghan army and police with the goal of creating a self-sufficient Indigenous security force in Kandahar province so Canadian troops can start withdrawing in February 2009. Option two is to focus on reconstruction in Kandahar, which would require some other country or countries to take over our security role. Option three is to shift Canadian security and reconstruction efforts to another region of Afghanistan. And option four is to withdraw all Canadian military forces after February 2009, except a small contingent to provide security for our remaining aid workers and diplomats. As the panel considers these options, I've asked them to keep the following considerations in mind. Whatever future path we choose in Afghanistan, it must respect the sacrifices Canadians have made there. We have made considerable progress in improving the lives of the Afghan people, at great expense to our troops and our treasury. We must also be cognizant of the risk of a return to chaos in Afghanistan and of the potential regional and international implications. We must also bear in mind our obligations to the United Nations and our NATO allies. And of course, whatever direction we choose, it must consider the implications for Canada's international reputation. I appreciate, John, that we are asking a lot of you, but I have confidence you will examine the issues honestly, fairly, and expertly, and that your wise counsel will help parliamentarians choose the right course.
If you don't like what you hear from Mr. Manley's panel, will you still accept that report and put that before Parliament?
Obviously, we're going to take the panel's recommendations very seriously. I'm very confident we will get a report that the government will be very comfortable with having a public debate on.
Mr. Manley, do you believe this is a genuine effort by the Prime Minister to take the partisanship out of the Afghan issue which divided the country? And you are a prominent Liberal, and I want to know what your views are on accepting this, because it has become a very divisive issue in Parliament and across the country.
It's a good question, and I spent many hours over the past week worrying about that very issue. I came to this conclusion: I'm a Liberal. I'm a supporter of the Liberal Party. But I have some history in Afghanistan and my two visits that have touched me very deeply in terms of the humanitarian needs that I've seen there. And I'm very conscious of the responsibility that Canada has as a member of the global community. And I see many of these issues being in a very difficult tension, and I consider the question of what Canada does in Afghanistan following the current mandate to be one that is really transcends partisan politics. It's an issue for our country, and when called upon to serve, it's not only an honor for me, but it's my responsibility to do so to the best of my ability.
Prime Minister, I want to ask how much of this is about finding the best route forward for Canada, and how much of it is taking the question off the table for the fall session?
The government can't take the issue off the table. I mean, Afghanistan is a major public policy issue, and it will be addressed in the throne speech. This is not an easy question. I know that it's not an easy question for Mr. Dion. It's not an easy question for the government. I think we would all be well advised to take a deep breath and to take a look at the facts before we rush to judgment. The government obviously has its own preferences and prejudices, but my guess is that the panel will leave the politics of it to the government. The whole approach here is to try and take kind of the unhealthy politics of a minority parliament out of a decision that has wide-ranging implications for Canada for a long time to come.
My belief has always been that at the end of the day, good policy is good politics, and I'm very confident we can work together. Our first task is to build a consensus among the five of us. None of us lives in a cave. We're conscious of the political debate and the positioning that's going on in Parliament. However, I think what our task is to try to rise above the partisanship and look at what are the interests of Canada and how will they best be served by the decision that is taken by Parliament sometime, I guess, next winter or spring about the future role. So we'll do our best to give considered, thoughtful judgment on that, and the parliamentarians will take it from there.
I think in the end, to talk about the politics of this, I don't think the people of Canada, when they're addressing issues like Afghanistan, are going to cast a judgment on whether they like or don't like the government's Afghan policy. I think what they're going to cast a judgment on is whether they trust the government's leadership and judgment on such a question. And I think that's what's really at stake, and I hope all party leaders will reflect on that, because I think history's been very clear on that. The public can disagree with you on questions of national, international security, and you can be elected or re-elected. But if they think you cannot lead and you cannot apply good judgment to those questions, then I think you've got a big problem.
We have a lot to do in Afghanistan. We are ready to do that outside the combat mission. And this is something we need to do in coordination with our allies and the government of Afghanistan. And this Blue Ribbon panel may be a help on this way to help Canada to see in which way we may work with other partners in Afghanistan in a positive way. But it should not be a pretext for the government to postpone the clarity we need about the length of the combat mission. Well, I'm not against a panel of experts. I have a strong regard for many of the members of this panel, especially the president of the panel. What I'm saying, though, it should not be a pretext for the government to postpone what the government has to do. And it is to notify NATO and the government of Afghanistan that our combat mission in Kandahar will end in February 2009, and that Canada will be available and willing to help otherwise than through a combat mission. I think it's very difficult to find a decision more serious than to send some of your men and women in uniform to fight and to risk their life in another country. And I understand why Mr. Manley, when the Prime Minister asked him to give his skills and his talents to clarify what we may do after February 2009, accepted to do so. I think it's a very honorable gesture from him.
Well, this is a clearly partisan panel that is going to delay what really should be happening, which is the withdrawal of our troops and Canada playing a new role in Afghanistan. Well, let's remember, the Liberals have taken us into the Afghanistan mission in the first place, and then a significant number of them, including their acting leader at the time, supported Mr. Harper's decision to go for 2 more years. So the Liberals have been all over the map on this, which I guess gave Mr. Harper quite a few options in terms of the decision he was going to make. He chose someone who was in the cabinet with Mr. Dion when we decided to go into the mission, and the Liberals decided to take us into the mission in the first place. I think that says something rather profound. This is another example of Mr. Harper's disrespect for elected representatives, that he has to go outside the people that Canadians chose to make decisions in order to get advice and recommendations. We have a minority parliament here. The House of Commons should be the place where these discussions happen.
Would the Liberal MPs be defaulting on their duties if they don't show up for those
We've
votes?
seen the Liberal MPs default on their duties before. They did not show up, a number of them, including the former Prime Minister who took us into Afghanistan when the vote on extending the mission came forward, and that allowed Mr. Harper to extend the mission. That irresponsibility and division of opinion within their ranks, which couldn't be characterized as leadership, is becoming increasingly well known by many Canadians.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.